There are three areas that I hope in these three workshops we're going to talk about and deepen our awareness of. Trauma. You know, the word trauma is sort of thrown around the world. It became a word, the in word. Oh, it's trauma. We're dealing with trauma. But understanding the tiefkeit of trauma and how it affects and what it does to a human being and what should be our expectations of a person who's suffering with trauma, that I discover most people don't really understand. And my experience has been kaseda, that if we don't chap the sugya deeply, that all our children are going through of what exactly is trauma. We understand it's trauma, we got that. But what does it mean, Lamaisa? And how does it affect them? So if we don't grasp that, I feel, on a very, very deep level, where we live with them and feel for them and have compassion for them, then it inevitably affects how we deal with them. Our impatience displays itself, our frustrations displays itself. We all have, a feeling somewhere inside. I think Rabbi Gedalia mentioned before, if you come here because you're hoping, we're longing for our children to return. We want to fix them and get on with it. And that impatience pushes us forward and in fact is exactly counterproductive to what we want to achieve. So I wanted to take us on a journey. I thought it would be helpful if we went on a journey of deeply understanding what trauma means, and more importantly, what trauma means to us and to our children. At the same time, I would like to add that this olam sitting here, most of us here have experienced trauma too. We're all trauma sufferers to one degree or another. When you see your precious jewel of a child struggling, that itself is a traumatic experience. So I'd like to suggest that we take this material that we're going to talk about in these next day or two, but apply it to yourself too. Think about where you're struggling. Think about what happens with you. Because honestly, I believe that all of us, to a degree or another, and I see it when I work with parents and families, we're all struggling. We're all traumatized. The context within which we're looking at the specific sugya of trauma, and then we'll deepen our awareness of impulse disorder, of what it is and why it's so difficult and how to deal with it, will bring us to understanding, I hope, how to operate our families better, how to relate to each other more positively, with more love, more kindness, more understanding, more patience. That's the goal of these three workshops. Now, the specific traumas that we're talking about, we have to remember, are in a context that I believe we in Klal Yisrael have an enormous amount of trauma that we're dealing with still. We all have. We can't deny the reality that the Holocaust traumas, the variety of different, more specifically the two types of Holocaust traumas, the either over-smothering, over-controlling, over-protecting traumatic reaction, or the disconnected, we don't love, we don't kiss, we don't emotionally connect. Those traumas that came out of the Holocaust are still there. Let's not fool ourselves. When I began my work 32 years ago, of course I was dealing with survivors and children of survivors all the time. Today we're looking at third and fourth generation who are also suffering with those same traumas globally and unaware that they're even suffering from trauma. So we have a context of both Holocaust trauma around us as part of the fabric of our society, and the much worse, more insidious trauma is, unfortunately, and I don't mean this as an attack or critique, but as a reflection of a process that's still unfolding, which is the traumas caused by the school systems that we have our children in today, recognizing that the reality, if we would interview random samples of 12th grade graduating kids, of course we have to add in the kids who never made it to 12th grade, so we'd have to randomly sample children that started in primary and take a look at them 12 years later. And if we'd ask those children, was your experience a positive one, or are you glad you're finished with it? Are you glad it's over? Do you look back fondly, or are you glad it's done? And when I do this kind of research, shockingly, about 80% of the kids are glad it's done. They're glad they're finished. There's about maybe 20% of the kids overall in the entire yeshivish Hasidic system that feel they did well and are happy about what happened to them during their journey through the system. 80% of them suffer through the system very badly, and there's another type of insidious, undiagnosed trauma that they struggle with. So in the background of the specifics of the children that we're our children who go through specific problems and issues and struggles, in the background there's a fabric of trauma, which is both the Holocaust trauma and the school system trauma, if you want. Because the system that we have today is a system that was designed to recover from the Holocaust. It's a recovery system, and rightly so. It's a system where the Moistet HaTorah matter more than the children in the Moistet. That was a recovery, that's survival. But that's not continuity. That doesn't last, that doesn't keep things going. And such a system, inevitably, I hope, will keep unfolding and become more sensitive to the children in where it is a child-centered system, which it is not today. It is not a system that's focused on the individual child. It's focused on the individual Moised being successful. So in the background of all the specific traumas, we have children who are living in a fabric of trauma to begin with. So to me, it's so crucial that we should grasp and understand, so what is trauma? How does it affect? So that the goal of this, I hope, is that we will walk away with an amazing depth of compassion and understanding for our children and be able to speak to them and interact with them differently, because we'll understand on a much deeper level where they're coming from. Now I just want to say a quick disclaimer before we continue, giving them time to set this up. You nearly there? Good. So I want to say the following. I understand that there are many, or I don't know how many, I have no clue, but I know there are numbers of people sitting here who've done Regis course, is that right? Am I correct about that? Who know something about, must have learned a lot about some of the material we're going to speak about today. So there are those who have more knowledge and those who have less. I'm assuming that some people have very primitive knowledge or understanding of exactly how trauma works. And for others, you may have much more information and knowledge already, which may make some of this sound a little bit, boring to you. I hope not. I'd like to say the following. Over the years, I consistently went to different trainings. I always was doing training. By the way, I'm just filling in until they're finished. This is all like just so we don't get lost. I went to many trainings over the years, constantly, and as I progressed in my own training, I became more and more disappointed as I went to trainings from world experts and professionals who essentially, basically almost everything that was there I knew. Everything they were saying I knew, and I found it very frustrating to spend the time and the money to go and listen to stuff that I basically knew already. It was disappointing. Then one day, I was driving back from Washington. I went to a workshop on sexual abuse treatment. And I found that basically everything there I knew. And it was a long drive back in the snow. I wasn't very happy about it at all. And then it occurred to me that something one of my clients had once said to me, that every time I go to a workshop or a training, my confidence in what I do rises. And that's if I go to a conference and I'm hearing an expert saying stuff that basically I know, well, that should give you confidence. That should give you an inner strength of security in yourself. So I'm hoping that everyone will nosh something from what we're going to be doing over these 3 workshops, and something to take home, change your life, and be valuable. If you take one nugget home that could change your life, then this whole thing is kedai and worth it, in my opinion. So, an in-depth understanding of trauma, impulse disorder, and family responsibility. Let's start at the beginning. This is where I started, was understanding the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the American Psychiatric Association. What's their definition of trauma? And it's important because the relevance to us, often you send your children for treatment, and you need to send your children for treatment to people who understand how to adapt and understand the nature of trauma to our community. Because if it's not going to work, that you send them to rehabs and programs where they're going to go by the book, and the book is not exactly fine-tuned to our world. Let's take a look. Traumatic events, it says, are defined as exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. Now, for most of our kids, what they look at as sexual violence, even with the cases of molestation that happen to our children, and sexual abuse, do not qualify as being violence. The kids are not exposed to near-death experiences. So right away, you start off, the whole premise of trauma, when you interact with the secular treatment world, is suspect, because they look at us and they don't see that our kids as being traumatized. They don't begin to understand what it is, because it doesn't qualify as having exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violence. Let's go further. Here's another definition. Trauma is an emotional response to a terrible event, like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. Immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. Longer-term reactions may include unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headaches or nausea. So the long-term reactions happen to be true for the things happening to our children. But again, when we talk about our children being traumatized, we often struggle, if you look in the books and the literature, of what they define as trauma, it doesn't seem to fit. This is the problem we were facing year after year, trying to understand how to relate to what's happened to our children. Why is that called trauma? Why are they having those reactions? When it fails, as you can see, it is not a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. There are levels. Okay? There are levels on which horrible events impact our lives and cause a traumatic reaction. The traumatic reaction is where I'm thrown into a state of fight, flight, or freeze uncontrollably. I'm gone. I'm dissociated. I'm disconnected. I'm offline. That experience, according to the way they define it, is probably not true for almost all of our children. So when we start talking about they're traumatized, and you look in books and literature, it's very difficult to see exactly what we're talking about in terms of our children. And I've had countless parents who have sincerely tried to grasp or understand how is whatever's going on with my child, how is that called trauma? Because if you look in the books, it doesn't fit. So you become skeptical of what is all this trauma talk. Maybe it's all nonsense, they're making it up, and my kids aren't traumatized, and they just need svei pech, and let's get on with it. Let's look at 5 types of panic response. These are the types of response when things happen to you. When things happen to you that scare you or frighten you, here's the 5 levels of response. And we're going to be most interested in the last 3, so I'll move through the first 2 quickly. Normal stress response is the first one. Normal stress response is what occurs before you get PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. It doesn't always lead up to the full-blown disorder. You're scared. A person has a horrible experience, but recovers relatively quickly. Events like accidents, injuries, illnesses, surgeries, etc. Any source of unreasonable amount of tension and stress can lead to this response. Typically, this can be managed easily with supportive friends, just speaking it over with the spouse, being understood. Occasionally people need a little therapy. Occasionally they might need some group therapy. But generally speaking, this is the normal stuff. We all go through difficult times in lives, and we have our struggles, and we have our issues, and we have painful moments where we feel enormously stressed and hurt. That's normal. That's part of life. And we get over that with support and kindness and understanding, and that's not something that haunts you for the rest of your life. On the contrary, 3 days later, that's the general rule of the thumb. 3 days later, you don't actually remember how scary that was, whatever that event happened 3 days ago. That's normal stress response. Now let's get to the next level, acute stress disorder. So again, it's not the same as PTSD. The reaction is strong, but not severe. It can be triggered in people who've been exposed to what is or what feels like a life-threatening event. Natural disasters, loss of loved ones, loss of a job, or risk of death. If left untreated, acute stress disorder could develop into PTSD. It could develop into it, but not necessarily. And usually a little bit of therapy, a little bit of counseling, again, takes people out of it. A couple of sessions, talk it through, and you're fine. In other words, the point here is that not all difficult, panicky, frightening, horrible events automatically cause PTSD and will throw our kids off the derech. This is not true. There's levels on which the problem impacts the person, and there's the norms of life and what the job is to differentiate between those which, yes, it is normal and regular and common that we should be able to 3 days later get over it, or talk it over with someone, a counselor, with a therapist, a rebbe, a mentor, a mashgiach, a mashpia, someone. You talk it over. You need a little bit of help. But again, a week, 2, 3 later, it's gone. It doesn't reoccur. That's the difference. It doesn't make a roshim on the person where it can come back and haunt you and starts controlling your life. These are normal reactions to life, and it's crucial that we learn how to differentiate between the 2 types of stress reactions. Each are scary, but we need to know which is which. Okay, now let's get to our material. Uncomplicated PTSD. So uncomplicated, or this is really what they refer to as single event PTSD, is usually linked to one major frightening event. That's what we discussed at the beginning. A near life-threatening event. Someone felt that there was something so horrific, so frightening, one event that happened to them, that they're terrified for their lives, and it can throw them into a complete panic mode where they start obsessing and thinking over and can't forget and can't get it out of their system. That's the easiest form of PTSD to treat, and it's almost not negea to our sugya either. At least it defines itself as PTSD. I want to put it on the map, but again, it's rarely our sugya. The symptoms of uncomplicated PTSD include, which is similar to what we're going to talk about, avoidance of trauma reminders, nightmares, flashbacks to the event, irritability, mood changes, and changes in relationships. This is where people can get re-traumatized by, if it was I'll give you a marshal, unfortunately, a single event of molestation, of sexual abuse, and it occurs on a specific street where someone touches a child inappropriately, and it's in a certain location, the avoidance of that location, the inability to walk down that street, the sense of fear of anything that even looks like that street, that's it relates to the event, and it terrifies a person where there's internally a mechanism to protect a human being from being traumatized again. We're going to come to what that internal mechanism is. So internally, the brain informs the person that something like that is about to happen, could happen again. And so the person gets the terror response, the fearful response. That's PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And of course they're terrified. The classic disorder was more or less invented after the Vietnam War, when they discovered that Vietnam vets were coming back traumatized from the sounds and the events of the war, and would be on a regular high street, walking down the street, and hear a car backfire or a motorbike backfire, you know, the noise, the loud noise of a car backfiring, and leap on the floor or in certain cases kill people, react as if they're in the jungle about to be killed and start killing people. This is PTSD. Uncomplicated PTSD, that means single event PTSD, can be treated through therapy, medication, or a combination of both. And in this case, EMDR is almost always the best possible treatment. EMDR almost always will focus on that specific event and can change the internal mechanism and help a person feel free. Still not our sugya. I want to be very clear. I'm trying to build up towards, by isolating what is not our sugya, these are not our sugyas. Almost any of these types of panic and fear is not what our children are going through. Complex PTSD, this is our sugya. This is the sugya that we have to understand because it's extraordinary and it's so overwhelming, and the problem is it frequently doesn't relate to any single event. In fact, if you would look at any single event of what happened, the kids generally, someone will say, that's what bothered you, that hurt you. But it's not about an event anymore. Because in complex PTSD, it's the opposite of uncomplicated PTSD, as it's caused by multiple traumatic events, not just one. Each little event, cumulatively, when you build up more and more and more and more of those events, over time causes that traumatic reaction. Complex PTSD is common in abuse and domestic violence cases. And while they share the same symptoms, treatment of complex PTSD is more intense than uncomplicated PTSD, which is why we have the problems. This is why we have so much difficulties reaching and understanding our children and helping them with it, because there's no single event to go and treat. The experiences they've had, cumulative, take, just again, le marshal. Take a child, anyone, I'm sure any of us here could have a child who has a serious learning disability. And they're in an environment, a school system, where success, hatzlacha in life, is defined by your academic success. And when you don't succeed academically, and when you go into class every day and you feel like a total loser, you feel stupid every day, day after day after day, and kal v'chomer if you get called on to read something, even when it's a well-meaning teacher or rebbe who wants to encourage the child and push the child and get them to read and give them chizuk, you can read, but they can't. Or they can't translate, and they can't do it. Day after day, year after year, being in a class, feeling like a total, utter loser, cumulatively, it's like every step into that class and every time I tried to learn, when you put all that together, is actually traumatic for that child. That means they can actually dissociate, they can disconnect, they can look at the whole thing as the most frightening, horrible experience, as one that affirms for them that you're a loser. Imagine the Gehinnom of going into school every day feeling like that. And there's no one event that ever happened you could say that was a traumatic event. And yet every day the sinking feeling of walking into Gehinnom knowing I can't do this. Complex trauma, and just so we can understand, is extraordinarily difficult to treat. It is so not like any other form of trauma, or simple, uncomplicated trauma. It's not like that at all. And by the time usually the child has grown up, become older and started struggling, they are deeply, deeply affected by a myriad of different hurtful experiences that have happened, again, each one on its own, which was not a life-threatening or near life-threatening experience. So they would never get the PTSD diagnosis, and it's almost impossible to treat it because there's no one event you're going to be able to handle with one event and go and do something about it. Most of our children are suffering with complex PTSD. Most of them have, complex, by the way, doesn't mean like difficult. It's not like the complexity of it. Complex simply means lots of different types of frightening and hurtful and painful experiences that affirmed that I'm a loser, that I'm hopeless, that I'm never going to succeed. The affirmation that somehow I'm worthless. And that's an insidious feeling. The look on a parent's face when a child can't do homework properly. Just that look on your face that affirms in the early years when you're trying to, be mechazik and push your kid to learn, and meanwhile all they see is disappointment or disgust or frustration that he should be taking 10-15 minutes to do this homework, and this kid can't do it. It takes half an hour or an hour, and he's wasting my time. How many people have said that to their kid in the early years? Don't waste my time. You're wasting my time. It's taking you so long. And unaware that what we're actually doing is traumatizing our children. Literally traumatizing our children. I'm going to explain it all so we'll get the mechanics. I just want to get the feel first. So there's two things I've been trying to explain. Number one, in the secular world, we fought, I and other colleagues, for years and years and years, because they kept trying to argue with us the kid doesn't have PTSD. It's not true. They're not trauma victims. Because, as I've shown you, technically, they don't fit their models because there's no near life-threatening experience. So they start diagnosing our kids with all sorts of weird diagnoses that aren't true, that really are just reflective of their reaction of not being understood, of not being treated. So yes, they look like impulse disordered ADD, ODD. They look like emotions and feelings all over the place. Bipolar, manic depressive. And so you get these diagnoses that then come along with medications to treat something that's not true. And meanwhile, the kids are suffering something awful, and their reactions are predictable once you understand PTSD, complex PTSD. As I'm going to show you in a moment. It's mind-boggling, actually, how simple it is. I mean, it's really simple once you see it. And nevertheless, these poor kids get these diagnoses thrown at them, including very often medication for a disorder they don't have, because what they are is complex trauma victims. Individuals with complex PTSD are frequently diagnosed with, there you go, I'm sorry, I was ahead of myself, are frequently diagnosed with borderline or antisocial personality disorders or dissociative disorders. They very frequently are given a disorder that actually isn't the real disorder. I'm sorry I'm so passionate about it, but I have to tell you, I've seen so many kids dragged into my office, with a list of the treatment protocols and diagnoses they had that were simply not true. How many kids were medicated early on in life that actually made them into dependent on substances? And then they turn to substances when they're later on, and we're all scratching our heads. I wonder why he did that. But we put them on the substances because we didn't understand trauma. I hope you're getting my gist here. I'm sorry, it kills me. I'm telling you straight, it kills me. I'm spending a career trying to repair the damage of these children who were inappropriately diagnosed, and had we understood it to begin with correctly, what was really going on, and got them the correct treatment for complex PTSD, they would never have been on the medications in the first place, and they would have been healed. It's much a crime. These children can exhibit behavioral issues such as impulsivity, aggression, substance abuse, or sexual impulsivity. As I said before, these diagnoses, they get diagnosed with the behavioral, the stuff that we see them doing fits some other behavioral diagnostic criteria that just isn't true. It just isn't true. They can also exhibit extreme emotions such as intense rage, depression, or panic. Here's the facts. The facts are that people suffering with complex PTSD are triggered by a mountain of different things. Can trigger them and put them into a state of rage, of disconnect, of hurt, of anger. We're going to go through exactly what those criteria are. And please forgive me if this is a little bit scholastic and boring. But you have to get this first. If you can get this in your kishkas and realize what we've done to our kids, I know what it did for me. It changes us to being apologetic and compassionate instead of judgmental and frustrated. It takes us to a different place, and we need to be in that different place. Worse still than complex PTSD is the fifth level, which is comorbid PTSD, which is in fact where they actually do have a mental disorder, where they have actually correctly been diagnosed with an emotional psychiatric diagnosis, where they have a problem on top of it. So not only do they have complex trauma from all their early experiences, and just to focus you on, I mentioned the one about learning trauma, which we'll come to later on. But we all know in our world how early sexual exposure or sexual abuse, we'll come to what that is later exactly, for children in our world, in the Torah world, how that is one of the most profoundly traumatic things that happens to a kid, not because of the maisa that was done to the child. It's not because of the event. We're not talking about violent rape like they talked about at the beginning, in the diagnosis of PTSD. We're not talking about that. But imagine if you could just put yourself in a classroom of an average cheder, Beis Medrash, Mesifta, anywhere where a Rebbe, a well-meaning, sensitive, well-meaning, passionate Rebbe is darshaning, or it could be teacher to the girls in the high schools. In the boys' case, where they're darshaning passionately to inspire the boys about Shmiras Einayim and Shmiras Haguf, taking every opportunity to inspire them, not knowing, not realizing that a good number of boys in that classroom, on average, 20%, 1 in 5, will have been sexually abused or sexually exposed, same thing, we'll explain that later, in their childhood. And now you've got 20% of that classroom re-traumatized every time he dashens. Every time a teacher who has a girl in her, again, same 20%, who were sexually exposed and discovered themselves to be entering they've entered that world where they see themselves, tznius is meant to be something, it's a beautiful thing, in which when a girl becomes a kala, so they introduce the other parts of her life into the world of tznius. It's not a separate world. It's not a world of tznius and there's a world of sexuality. It's not true. It's integrated into the world. It's a beautiful thing. But where a girl was sexually abused young, and now she's sitting in a classroom, hundreds of times listening to well-meaning teachers passionately extolling the virtues of tznius. Every single time that happens, this girl is traumatized again. That's complex trauma. It's hundreds and hundreds of events that turn the person off completely. They are completely shut down. The girls and boys I talk to describe the punishment. Again, I just want you to understand complex trauma. The punishments they got time and time and time again, because to cope with listening to those well-meaning drashas, they would dissociate. They would disconnect. They would withdraw into another world, only to be brutally criticized, blamed and punished for being myriad, for being rebellious, for being disinterested. I see you close your eyes every time we talk about it. Why are you so rebellious? They cope. I have kids who told me they find a spot on the wall where they stare at that spot the whole time that these things go on in an effort to block it all out. I have kids, girls who told me they put their head down and then they get screamed at for putting their head down and get thrown out of the class. So one girl told me it was the best way not to be there. I just put my head down and then I get thrown out. I don't have to listen to all that. Complex trauma is thousands of events. Each one you could say, that's traumatic, that's not traumatic. But I'm going to show you in a moment what it does to the brain, what it does to the nervous system, and how it creates a traumatic reaction and disconnects that child from our Masorah, from your families, our families. Completely disconnects them. They don't feel part of it. When a Rebbe, again, I want to be very clear, I don't knock or criticize, not moisters, not Rebbes, not teachers, not at all. On the contrary, I'm always trying to support them. It's a difficult task. But so many times I mentioned to different schools, when a Rebbe dashens about Shmir Senayim and Shmir Saguf to teenage boys, you can't do that till you've said to the Bachim in the front of you, boys, some of you have been exposed inappropriately. It's Pashut. It happens. What I'm about to say does not apply to you. You know who you are. Ignore what I'm saying. It's not for you. You come speak to me later on privately and we'll talk about what's your pathway. What's your journey? You have a different nisayon. I'm glad to help you. But what I'm saying now is not for you. Is that so hard? Is that so hard? But it doesn't happen, unfortunately. And the statistics tell us that about 20% of all kids in our world are sexually abused, exposed early on. And they walk into a different world. I'll talk more about this later. But I'm using this now just to help us understand complex trauma. It's not about one specific event that was life-threatening. That's traumatic, that fits their books, but doesn't fit our. None of this stuff that our kids are struggling with, kimat none of it, fits anything that makes sense in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. And therefore the treatment is lost on these poor kids. It's up to us to understand it. And it's up to us to find the right treatment professionals who get this, who understand what this really is. Yes, there is comorbid PTSD, it's true, where there's an underlying mental illness, psychological illness, diagnosis, and it's real. It happens. Complicated. Much more complicated. But what we have to be aware of are the vast majority of the children who get diagnosed with things that aren't true, and what they're struggling with is trauma. And their reactions are not rebellious, they're surviving. They're trying to survive. They're trying to make it through the day. It's not rebellious. It's pure survival. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. He gave us a brain and a nervous system to help us survive. They're only doing what they were programmed to do. Here's our experience. What's our experience with our children? This first session goes till when? Does anyone know when this first session goes till? Is it 6? Okay, I just want to pace myself here. Our experience. So I'd like to shift it. If I had the schus to rewrite DSM, 5 yeshivish, chassidish, we'll write our version of it. So we change a lot of diagnoses. We would adjust them to be reflective to our world. So they would really talk to us. Here's what my experience is. A traumatic event is an incident or series of incidents that cause profound physical, emotional, psychological, sexual, or spiritual harm. It's nothing to do, do you notice? It's nothing to do with a life-threatening experience. There are 5 dimensions that we live in, that we bring our children up. I think I talked a little bit about this at the first Kesher Nafshi conference. What is abuse? See, abuse in our world causes PTSD. It causes trauma to our children. And the abuse plays out in these 5 dimensions. Physical abuse. We're all aware by now, I think, we should be anyway, that hitting children in this door is abusive. If anyone, again, please, let's get our, they'll quote me on this, and distort what I have to say. An insult punch to a little child who's walking near the street. When you walk out a 2-3-year-old and they go towards the street and they keep walking towards you and you give them an insult punch, that's not a punch that hurts, it's a punch that insults them. Oh, they cry, it's gewaltig. You want that. That's healthy, it's gesund. An insult punch. Beyond that, in this door, the world we are living in, Rabbi Sai, any other hitting is abuse in this generation. The world changed. Hashini Ateva. Listen, I grew up, as a child, we got caned. Not regularly, I was a pretty good kid, but I did get caned. And we certainly got slippered in school. I don't know, anyone English here, you know what slippering was. You went up to the front of the class, you had to bend over, and they whacked you with a slipper, with a sneaker, in front of the class. Slippering, it was almost like, you're proud of yourself if you got slippered, it was like study, But we got slippered and we got, caned and we got whacked. And I want to tell you, most of us turned out just fine. And I definitely don't have traumatic memories. If I see a cane or a slipper, I run the other way because I got PTSD from it. Not at all. It was culturally normal. Today, you go to jail if you do that. Today you go to jail. Why? Because it's Shinei Teva. The problem is that so many people grew up in a world where physical, control over children through patch, Tzvei Petch was the rule of the day. And we don't realize that in this generation, that is abusive. And if you do it enough times, you erode your child's self-esteem, and he's frightened of being punched again, and that contributes to PTSD. It's such a terrifying experience for a child today. Again, one time? Of course not. Cumulatively, yes. And so I have many kids who went through schools where they were whacked and punched and terrified of it. Terrified of it. And this is only going to get worse as the durs continue. For those of us, or those amongst us, who used punching early on with your children, you have to realize they're traumatized. That's traumatic. It takes away their... Remember we talked about how many times safe, secure, seen, and soothed? It takes it away. It denies them the feeling of being safe and secure. So they lose their attachments. So we have to go back and address that. Physical abuse is a really serious issue. Emotional and psychological abuse. Well, actually, we're going to come to speak about all of these shortly. So what do we say? The person experiencing the distressing event may feel threatened, anxious, or frightened as a result. The person will need support and time to recover from the traumatic event and regain emotional and mental stability. This is the important thing. When we commit these kinds of abuse, the person feels threatened, anxious, or frightened. In this generation we live in, that's something. That's a zach. That's real. That's abusive. And one generation ago, threatened, anxious, or frightened. Who wasn't frightened of their father? I remember my father V'Shalom came down one day, pulled off his belt at the breakfast table, and he whacked the table. I remember very clearly the end of the belt hit the sugar bowl, and my brothers and I all sat there, and the sugar bowl danced because he hit it, and it went to the edge of the table and crashed on the floor. And he put on his belt again. He said, "Just a warning." In those days, it was a story we told over. It was just like, you do anything remotely like that today, children, and it was the fear, just feeling threatened, anxious, or frightened, that's abusive today, to do that to kids. And if we do that, God forbid, in what we believe is a process of trying to teach them midas, can you imagine the contradiction, the stira, that we're frightening them into behavior. We're scaring them into learning or going to shul on time. What we're actually doing is abusing them. And that abuse, if it's done over and over and over again, remember, as one time, done again and again and again, contributes to complex trauma. It makes a child feel scared for their life, afraid, insecure of what's going to happen next, and triggers a system inside them, which I'm going to show you shortly, that is absolutely beyond their control, where they will then react traumatically, and then the whole world comes down on them. Once the trauma system starts for any of our children, their world collapses. Nishnor, they had the experience that caused the PTSD. Do you understand what I was saying? Let alone putting aside the problems and issues that happened to them that caused the PTSD reaction, once they now are having a PTSD reaction, frequently, that's not understood, not diagnosed properly, and not treated, their whole world collapses. Their world falls apart. And that's why it's so crucial that we understand this and we try and head this off. A child that versteht sich have no real Havana. Listen, we don't even understand what's happening to them. How should they understand it? How should they grasp it? So their world collapses, Rabbi say, imamish collapses. Because they're now blamed for their reaction. You understand, they had complex trauma. They get triggered because they're frightened or threatened or anxious and scared of hurt, whether it is physical, emotional, psychological, sexual, spiritual. We'll come to all that shortly. Their reaction to it is self-preserving, which means I don't care about you or the world or anyone else. I'm just going to survive myself, and they get killed for that reaction by parents, by schools, system, the street. Kill them for that reaction. And all they're doing is reacting because they're PTSD. So their world collapses. Mamish collapses. What's the mechanics? Let's do the mechanics. So a traumatized person, in our books, let's let it go of all the near-life threatening. Avada, that's, traumatic. Avada, that's PTSD. It has nothing to do with our sugya. Our sugya is all these events that undermined a person, a child, and made them feel frightened, scared of life, anxious about their ability to succeed and please us as parents, satisfy their teachers and rebbes. And Kal V'chomer, Ben Benosha Kal V'chomer, the 20% plus who will have been sexually abused or sexually exposed, they're goners. So they'll likely be diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I want to explain the problem. I'm going to build it up more so we understand the challenges, why it's so difficult to treat these poor kids. Because PTSD implies post-traumatic stress disorder. It means it's over. They came back from Vietnam, and now it's just things happening that trigger that, but it's not happening now. I think everyone's nodding wisely as you understand where I'm going with this. With our children, it's not post, it's present traumatic stress disorder. They're still seeing the looks on the faces of the people in the streets, of their parents or siblings or neighbors or grandparents and friends and who knows who look at them and pretend to smile. So how you doing? How you doing, Shafler? How you doing? As if obviously you're doing terrible. Obviously you're a wreck. They absorb the world around them, looking at them as the failures, as the garbage of our world. Because of their reaction, do you understand? They had a problem that was never their fault in the first place. Whether it was sexual exposure, as I said, or the learning disabilities. We'll come to all the details of what the list is later. But whatever happened to them, this I guarantee you, no child in our world ever went to Pathmark or ShopRite to get the off-the-derech cereal, cornflakes. Let me have the off-the-derech cornflakes, ma. I want to go off the derech. Nobody ever did that. It never happened. In all my career, I met one person who claims he had a beautiful relationship with his parents and he's very bright and he's very good. It's just Judaism is not for me. One. I took him out for dinner 3 times to try and because he wouldn't come to my office because he's not sick. He's a perfectly happy, fry guy. Feels very bad for his parents. I couldn't get it. I couldn't work it out. One of the tens of thousands, I don't know how many. I don't even know anymore how many I've worked with, been involved with, where all the others had these horrible events happen to them because they couldn't learn well and they couldn't, they had, a difficult kind of personality or problem, whatever it was. Life, parents, system turned on them, creating complex trauma. They then react when triggered by that complex trauma, and the reaction is self-preservation, which means I don't care about you, I care about me. And if I want a McDonald's hamburger, I'm going to go get one. I don't care about your kashrus, I'm going to cook it up in my kitchen. I care about me because I want to survive. And then they get destroyed for the reaction to the complex trauma which they had in the first place. Like I said, their world collapses. It was never their fault. I never met one kid who I wasn't able to walk it backwards with them and help them see you never did anything wrong. You never did anything wrong. There's not one kid I ever worked with I wasn't able to walk it backwards, unravel their life and show it to them. And the kids always look at me and say, so why do I feel so bad about myself? Why do I feel I'm such a loser, such a horrible person? And I help them see that those feelings come because of their reaction to trauma, their reaction which is self-preservation, and then people say things like, he's so selfish. He's so selfish. Doesn't care about anyone else. He steals, selfish. Takes money from the Stuckerbuck, is selfish. Everything he does, he's just selfish. I tell the kids, no, you're not. You're centered on yourself. Because you want to survive. You're a PTSD person. You're dealing with complex trauma. And you want to survive. So you react to care for yourself when you feel crushed to pieces and destroyed and triggered and hurt. You just want to survive. And when you're in survival mode, no, you're not thinking about anyone else. You're thinking about you because you want to survive. It's really hard. And they need so much support from us when you realize that for most of them, as they go through life, they're present, not post-traumatic stress disorder, it's present in their lives. And then people abuse them more by saying, well, what do you expect? If she dresses like that, people are going to look at her. It's such a fascinating observation. I mean, it's completely true. If she dresses like that, people are going to look at her. So she obviously brought it on herself, so let's just blame her, right? Doesn't she chap? If you dress sneerstic, no one will look at you. Then everything's fine. Like, what's wrong with you? Wake up. The boy goes and gets a mohawk haircut, and then he says, people look at me in the street. I know what's wrong with them. If you understand complex trauma, what they're actually trying to do is treat themselves. They don't know this, I show it to them. They're actually trying to treat themselves. Because if I'm a trauma victim, if I'm a person who feels I'm a worthless piece of garbage, because that's what my life experiences taught me, and I'm talking about life experiences basically by age 9, 10, 11. By then they already know I'm worthless. Inside it's already there. So they'll look at me and think, that's like crazy. The kids will say it to me, that's like crazy. So if I dress properly, they'll love me. They don't love me. My mother loves the way I'm dressing. My father's not proud of me. He's just proud to walk me into shul because I look good. It makes him feel good. They're completely not proud of me. They don't even see me. But if I get a mohawk, and then my father... You know what a mohawk is? Oh, good, okay. It's like having both your pears just in the middle. Okay. But if I get a mohawk, and my father takes me into shul, and walks with me in the street, then I know I'm worth something. If she dresses chalashastik and my mother takes her with and goes out to eat with her and takes her to a simcha, this is my daughter, then for the first time she's self-treating. Don't you see that? She's Mommy must love me. Because she certainly doesn't love the way I'm dressed. That nauseates her, I know that. It's poshut. But she must love me. Guess what that treats? That treats the underlying abuse that caused the PTSD and the trauma in the first place. So here the kids' hanhaga and behavior is a certain form of survival and self-treatment. And what do we usually do? Unless you come to Kesher Nafshi or go to Avi, what do? You kill them. You give them the look. You fight them. You argue with them. You debate them. And they look at you and they know that fake smile is a fake smile. Come on. They know. Yeah, you look very nice today. They know. But it all derives, do you understand, from PTSD. They're reacting to being destroyed in the first place. We then kill them on the reaction, and they need that reaction for recovery and survival. It's a crazy sugya. It's a crazy sugya. What it demands, the gvura of us, to see that, to embrace that, to understand that, and embrace them, b'asher hu sham, the gvura it takes from us. That's why I say we're all trauma victims too. We are all trauma victims, every one of us. We've all had the reaction where we wanted to drop dead and die when we saw them dressing a certain way. It was actually more like the official diagnosis, because to us it was a near life-threatening experience. And I'm going to kill them or kill myself, but someone's going to die tonight. Right? We all went through feeling like that. And that doesn't go away. Oh, it does if you work at it. It does when you understand it. It deepens when you so get it, what they're doing, and you chap it, that you pasha want to cry the whole time, but never with disappointment or anger or shame. But you want to cry the whole time, like, I'm so sad I didn't chap this before. I wish I'd known this. I wish I'd known this. See, the problem, weiter with PTSD treatment, with complex trauma treatment, is that almost all of our kids, they're not running off to who knows Yehubitzville. In desperation, some of them might, because they can't live. But you know that none of the kids, Meir Rebbe Mashkiach, he used to say, there are no such thing as dropouts. They're all push-outs. They're all push-outs. These kids want to stay right in our communities. They don't want to run away. This is not tach v'tat, pogroms in Europe. I once had a long conversation with a big historian, a Jewish historian, that this phenomena, they say people always went off. And I said, never like this. Never in the history of Klal Yisrael did we behavior take tons of our precious children and push them off the derech. Never happened. Kids went off the derech. Sure. Pogroms and poverty took a toll on Klal Yisrael. Wars and idolatry back in the times of the Navi took a toll on Klal Yisrael. Of course. But there was never a time in history where we pushed them out, where we made them feel, we don't want you, you're not good enough to be a good Jew. If you're not perfect, yeshivish, chassidish, you don't fit exactly in our box, you're not Jewish. Never happened. These kids are not, they don't want to go away, they want to stay with us. They stay as long as they possibly can. In our communities, in our pizza stores, even going to shul sometimes. We push them away, and what we don't realize is these brave children, because I think they're extraordinarily brave, to stay in a frum community, despite the fact they're going to experience triggers of trauma constantly every time someone looks at them weird, or makes a comment at them. Which people do to this very day. Shemzach, you dressed like that. Shemzach. People make comments they don't understand, which just triggers the trauma more. Again, what they're really looking for is acceptance and love. Am I a good person or not? How will they get that acceptance if they put the right package on and they walk around doing it exactly the way you want? It's the clothing you accept, not the person. Did you ever really work out who is my child? Yeah, we talked about this, the scene of attachment, right? The scene. How many of us really sat down to work out who is my kid? Who are they? This sugya forces you to. This sugya makes you do it. How many people, when they're parenting, it's the kids in the bath and the kids in the car, and let's get the kids, let's the kids. Where are the kids? It's like we've got this thing called kids. Let's just push them through life. Each one is a unique individual diamond with a pneumius and das. But if you dress them up all exactly the same, we forget that. So no, they don't want to go back so quickly and dress in a way where they disappear. They cannot ever recover, especially when they're dealing with present traumatic stress disorder, if they dress the way we want them to. They can't recover. Because the Havemin is always in their brain. You love my clothing, you don't love me. There is no way you can convince them I love you when they go and dress exactly the way they know we want them to. And they're trying to recover, they're trying to recover their complex trauma victims. And then when we get upset with them, we trigger them. Is one of the mechanics of PTSD, intrusive recollection. Intrusive recollection doesn't have to be like a specific vivid memory. A person, God forbid, they get mugged. There's a physically violent event, right? A person, God forbid, gets mugged at knife point, beaten to a pulp, their wallet taken from them. That's a very frightening near-death experience that will cause PTSD in almost anyone. Almost anyone will have PTSD. What does it mean? It means afterwards they'll have one of the factors is intrusive recollection. That means the brain, it doesn't make peace with what happened. See, you have this experience observing me talking. I'm really hopeful it's not an abusive experience. I'm hopeful. Hopeful it's not boring. I'm hopeful it's not tedious to listen. I'm hopeful it's not stuff you all know, I wish you'd say something already. I'm hopeful it's interesting, right? Assuming it is, by the time you get to supper, maybe you'll talk a little bit about it, but you have a place in your brain where you can put that experience away. A folder, a filing cabinet, a memory place. There is a memory place, like a folder and filing cabinet in your brain where you can store the information you're learning from me now, here. You store it away. It's gewaldig. What happens when you have a traumatic experience, where you experience real trauma? There's no place to store it. There's no folder or filing cabinet. None of us, unless you've been mugged, God forbid, at night point. You don't have a folder. You don't have a place in your brain, in your memory cells, where to store that information. So it kind of stays there. One aspect of intrusive recollection is this: it keeps coming back in. You can't stop thinking about it. It's just there constantly, again and again and again. It's all you obsess about, all you think about. It's actually part of the system that Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us to help us survive. You don't want to be mugged again. So you remember and keep it fresh and present. You have instant recall. You think about it all the time. In addition to that, it gets triggered frequently where that memory of anything to do with it comes back. We'll speak about this soon. But it's constantly driving you crazy. It dominates your mind. It's there in your head all the time. Imagine the cruelty of kids who are told, just get over it. So you had a bad elementary school career. But Baruch Hashem, you're in high school now. Get over it. You had a bad Rebbe who didn't get along with you. I'm not saying a bad Rebbe for you. You didn't get along with him and you felt he was cruel. Get over it. You got a nice Rebbe now. How many of us have spent time trying to convince our children that now everything's fine. That's behind you. Now it's good. Everything's good now. We begin to imagine how, in a way, ludicrous that is, in terms of complex trauma, how utterly foolish and ludicrous. Actually, what that does to our children is make them feel completely miyush. Totally miyush. Miyush, hopeless. Hopeless. How'd you say in Chassidish? Miyush. Shkoich. A Chassidish translation as we go here. It's okay. The feeling of hopelessness in a child when you tell them anything that seems to sound like get over it, come on, we're done with that, let's move forward, fresh start, new yeshiva, new matzah, fresh start. What happened to complex trauma? What happened to all those experiences? Wasn't treated. It's still there. And it will be triggered. And these things are intrusive. I worked with a young lady who was an abuse victim. Sexual abuse and emotional abuse. It had happened years before. The perpetrator was gone. There was no risk of her being hurt again. And I got a report from her school. I actually met with them. It was a fascinating meeting. They wanted to meet with me because there's a problem. You know, we're working with her, but there's a problem. What's the problem? She frequently is tired in class. She puts her head down. She's always like putting her head down. And she's not engaging the class. And they were very upset about it because she got to learn, right? She's got to learn. I worked with her to build up in her the courage. she was a very special young lady, to go and tell them what was really happening. To point out to them that here where they're teaching Chumash and Navi, and she's trying so hard to get into it and to learn, and as she's learning, desperately trying to engage and learn the material, intrusive recollections of the abuse that was done to her keep coming into her head in the middle of learning Chumash and Navi. It was an utter nightmare for her. In her, what I believe was a heilige move, she decided it was better to shut out Chumash and Navi than learn Chumash and Navi with these thoughts in her head. I told her, you're a tzadekis she'en kamo. It's unbelievable what she did. And she got punished for it. With help, I was able to convince her to go and explain it to them. I'm not saying they took it very well. That's not my point. I met with them later on and gave them petch. Forgive me, but I gave them petch. They asked me, my classic response whenever I explain these kind of yesodis to schools when they meet with me, and they say, what do you expect of us? I say, you could resign. You could resign. You could give the job over to other people. You could. I mean, if you can't grasp this essence and go and give that girl a hug and tell her she's so special, that's mamish a heilige Sach. If you can't do that, then resign. You don't belong in chinuch. Doesn't make any sense. Intrusive recollections, these thoughts come back and back and back. So how is the traumatic event experienced again and again and again? And this time, we're not just talking about one event, right? By now we understand in complex trauma, we're talking about thousands of events. Hundreds and thousands of little events. So here's the first one. Recurrent and intrusive distressing recollections of the event, including images, thoughts, or perceptions. I mean, it's not a nightmare for these kids. Images, thoughts, or perceptions. They perceive their failure in learning. They feel, they're sitting at the table and they try to say something in an answer to a question on Chumash. They don't get it quite right. And someone says, no. Not meaning to hurt them. And they're gone. They're gone. They're triggered and gone. They're not there. To them, their world just collapsed on their head. So yes, they have these intrusive thoughts and memories come back again and again and again, reinforcing what a loser I am, or what a bad person I am, because I'm aware that I'm a sexual being. That makes me evil. It doesn't make her evil. In young children, repetitive play may occur in which themes or aspects of the trauma are expressed. I had a tragic story years ago. I don't want to go into all the details, but I was called by it was very interesting. 3 different people called me that they had noticed their children, who were like 3 years old, Shabbos afternoon, completely undressing, kids together, neighborhood kids and them, and playing together in the living room undressed. Never saw such a thing in their lives. 3 different people told me. They called me over a period of a week or 2 and told me this thing was going on. With a little bit of research, turns out there was one of each of those in those groups were in the same play group where abuse was occurring. Play with kids. People say, it's just kindish. It's not just kindish stuff. It comes out in their play and their action. You see it. And untreated later on in life, they're ruined. because those children will become sexual beings early in a world where that's not acceptable. There's no makom for that. You can't support it. So these kids suffer with these repetitive and intrusive thoughts. They very often, when people ask me many times, why do they walk around listening to these headphones with loud music? The whole house, it's in their ears and the house is still rocking, right? And they walk around non-stop, you can hear it coming and going, no one can hear. Why? Anyone know why? Because it blocks this. It's a sign of trauma. Once you see a kid walking around or non-stop listening to loud music with headphones, non-stop, you know it's a sign of a kid who's who's traumatized. They're trying to block it out. The retrusive, these thoughts and feelings that come in, they're blocking it. The same with the kids who binge watch TV shows, movies, non-stop. Why are they watching so much? Because it blocks this. And this is a nightmare. Intrusive memories and thoughts of my failure, of me being a loser, of me being destroyed is so dreadful that I'll block it any way I can. Whether it's drinking, or it's pot, or other drugs, or movies, music, whatever they need, I just want to block it. Because I can't stand it anymore. I'm just going to sit there and feel like this loser every second non-stop? It's a nightmare. Recurrent distressing dreams of the event. In children, there may be frightening dreams without recognizable content. Another sign of trauma. Dreams, weird, crazy dreams, are almost always a sign of trauma. The brain is trying to process the material that Be'etzim is not able to be processed. In our world, the worlds we live in, there's no makom for, like I said, there's no folder and filing cabinet in your brain for trauma, for traumatic experiences, for being a loser, feeling like a loser, for being sexually aware when everything around me tells me that makes me a goy gomer. There's no place to put that. The brain processes that material, trying to make sense, trying to place it, trying to work it out somehow. And I guess in the peaks, the peaks and valleys of sleep, in the peak, if you get woken up, while the brain's processing that, people have the most dreadful, horrible, painful nightmares. Sometimes connected, but usually not connected directly to the event at all. Again, that's a sign of PTSD. And one of those, kids, how many kids have I worked with who told me, again, they're unaware. Do you understand? They come into treatment because they're rebellious. As if that's a treatment. I said, I don't know, that's not a mental health treatment, being rebellious. There's no diagnosis. I've never seen one. Like, why are you really here? Make them laugh about it. But they come into treatment for one thing or another, and you listen to their stories. I remember distinctly one of the kids, one time, a kid in high school, who would come late, constantly late, never get up, can't get up, doesn't want to get up, doesn't want to be part of it, doesn't want to go to school again and again. Turns out that the kid is suffering every single night with repetitive, frightening nightmares that keep him up. So he keeps himself awake as long as he can all night not to have those nightmares. And then, of course, gets destroyed and punished and criticized the next day for being lazy. And why were you up all night? There's another sign of trauma. Acting or feeling as if the traumatic event were reoccurring. Well, this is the obvious one. includes a sense of reliving the experience, illusions, hallucinations, dissociative flashback episodes, etc. In children, trauma-specific reenactment may occur. That's that stuff I told you in the playgroup, where these kids were disrobing and playing, and doing sexual acts with each other. In the living room, Shabbos afternoon, was a reenactment. Reenactment is very common. Reenactment is one of the most painful aspects of trauma, which again, we destroy the children for. Let me explain reenactment. So the kids, look, two obvious ones. We could do the learning ones or the sexual abuse ones. It comes to the same place. The kid gets sexually abused, and it happens. They get over it. They feel horrible about it. They feel terrible, as a matter of fact. And the thing they feel most terrible about is this little girl, this 13-year-old little girl, feels terribly taken advantage of, out of control. Someone controlled her. Someone used her, and she's full of rage and anger about it. Lo and behold, how will she know that she's safe in the world with boys or men? How will she know she's safe if not to put herself back in a similar situation, to reenact what happened before, and this time survive, this time say no, this time resist, this time have the self-control to push away that person? So the very act of reenactment, where can you imagine what we all say, so why'd you do it again? Why'd you put yourself there? Are you crazy? Why'd you dress like that? Look what happened last time. But actually it's an act of reenactment in the hope that somehow this time there'll be a different outcome. This time I'll have the control to stop it. This time I'll be powerful. And of course they're not, because they're kids. Little kids reenact frequently what's happening to them in their trauma, where they play games that are sexually directed based on their experience that they had earlier on. And again, we get angry. Think about it, just think about it. We catch them reenacting, which is their way of coping. There's another lomdus in reenactment, I did it again, that means it's not so frightening. I don't mind doing this. The girl gets sexually abused, so she acts out sexually to diminish the impact of the abuse that happened to her in the first place. It's not so bad, I enjoy it. Of course she doesn't. Of course it's destroying her life. She reacts. The reenactment is a chelik of PTSD. It's a chelik of how you cope with complex trauma. And then we nail her for it. We critique her, mussar her. She's not aware herself. It's not like she's in lomdus aware of she didn't come to this workshop yet. So she doesn't know. But unconsciously, that's what she's doing, is trying to put herself to make it, normalize it. And when we catch her, we yell at her, we scream at her, and we destroy her. Reenactment is a normal chelik, unfortunately, of the reaction to trauma. It's part of PTSD. And when we see it, we need to be aware of it so we don't crush these poor little kids, but we understand that they're trying to cope with what happened. They're trying to deal with it. They're trying to live with it. And what they don't deserve is our crushing criticism and the critique of their behavior. Why are you doing it? Are you crazy? Itaka prutza? Here's the killer. This one is the killer. Number 4. Intense psychological distress at exposure to internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the original trauma. It means like this. Let me put that in language we can understand. Intense psychological distress means the kid freaks out. They have a psychological breakdown. You ever seen your kid act psychotic? They look like they're psychotic. Right? They want something, or they need something, you say no, or you can't do it right now, and they give you that look in their eyes. They're actually psychotic right now. Right? You know exactly what I'm talking about. You go crazy, you see that face. That is a severe psychological reaction. Would you not agree? At exposure to internal or external cues that symbolize or resemble an aspect of the original trauma. So it may smell, taste, feel, look, sound, internal, hinted at, thought at. In some way, it connects internally to them, that it feels like the original trauma. For example, you have this boy who has learning trauma, who is already reactive to the whole learning and davening, and you say to him, come Shefela, let's just learn one Mishnah. Come, it's Chol HaMoed, let's learn one Mishnah. And everyone thinks that's normal. And then the kid goes psychotic on you and throws the table over. Of course, your wife then says, oh, come on, you know. Yeah, but I thought one Mishnah. You see, but that one Mishnah, if he's got learning trauma, do you understand, is a severe psychological reaction, throwing the table over, going crazy at exposure to an external cue that resembles the original trauma, learning. And so too with everything else. This is so insidious. A severe psychological reaction to exposure to internal, a hint, a thought, a feeling. The feeling that Tati might ask me to learn a Mishnah because it's Chol HaMoed. I see him walk into the sukkah with a Mishnah. The kid's already fleeing. A girl sees the look on her mother's face, the chasna's coming, that she knows, how am I going to ask her to dress better? She sees the look, and she's already out of there. Don't you talk! I never said anything. Yes, you are. Yeah. They scream at you. That reaction, the severe psychological reaction, is what got Vietnam vets to kill people on the high street randomly when a car backfired. Because they heard a car backfire and it sounded like machine gun fire, and they turned around and killed someone. It actually happened. It's when they invented the diagnosis of PTSD. That's why they invented it. For them. Our poor kids, the multitude, remember in complex trauma, how many different abusive, horrible experiences did these kids experience over their life? They're now 15, 16. How many? Add them all up. How many? Thousands. Would you not agree? Thousands. And when they're exposed to an internal or an external cue that symbolizes or resembles an aspect of the original trauma, they freak out on you. What do most of us do when they freak out on us? Well, I bet you most of us are not happy about it. You can't speak like that. How can you talk like that? Have derech. If they don't actually get furious with them for doing it. And it's part of PTSD. It's a totally normal reaction to PTSD that should inspire in us compassion, where we feel heartbroken. I wonder what it was I did. Shefela, I'm so sorry. Not at the time, obviously, but later on, I triggered you. I wonder what I did. Have you any idea? Could you help me work out what I did that triggered you, that made you feel that way? In the same vein, physiological reactivity upon exposure to, where the guf, the body, goes crazy at exposure to, where they go mad, where you could have severe headaches, stomach aches, the whole host of psychosomatic illnesses. We'll come to that in the second session. All this can happen. This is all expected of a child with PTSD. Complex trauma. We expect them to behave this way. But I say, if we can own this, if we can understand this, imagine the difference in our reaction to them as we help them heal.